some changes in insulin resistance, which is going to be a big driver for long-term sleep deprivation and obesity, hyperinsulinemia, and again, with all of that comes the increased risk of arthritis, tendinopathy, and things like that. So, sleep is kind of important. We have our circadian rhythm, right? Melatonin production, low in the morning, rises throughout the night, and then falls when we go back to morning. And we have our reverse for cortisol. Cortisol spikes in the morning, drops, spikes in the morning, drops. And so these are opposite to each other, which helps ingrain a circadian rhythm, okay? These are not the only things that impact sleep. Your levels of adenosine monophosphate, which are impacted by caffeine and impacted by exercise. Okay, caffeine is going to lower them and inhibit it, which makes you feel awake. Exercise increases levels, which helps you sleep. So that's one of the reasons why exercise earlier in the day can help with sleep, because it helps raise levels of AMP. The other thing is our nervous system, which we'll get really into when we talk about the stress adaptation, but the level of sympathetic tone you have is going to be really important for how you're able to get into sleep and stay into sleep. So when we start looking at, okay, well, how does this impact pain, healing, and that kind of stuff? Well, here they took a group of, I believe this was the one where they took a group of healthy men, and they looked at, no, this was not the healthy men one. It was men and women, but not the one I'm thinking of. But what they did here was they took patients and they went from 8 hours and they sleep deprived them to 5 hours, okay? So think of that in med school life as pre-exams and then during exams, right? Sleep goes down, what happens to our hormones? Well, what they found was that there was an increase in sympathetic tone. So your sympathetic nervous system goes up, and when that happens, your parasympathetic nervous system goes down. So your body has a harder time relaxing and sleeping because parasympathetic activity is decreased. Cortisol concentrations went up in the evening, and then we had a decrease in glucose clearance. So basically we are starting to see some changes in insulin resistance, which is going to be a big driver for long-term sleep deprivation and obesity, hyperinsulinemia, and again, with all of that comes the increased risk of arthritis, tendinopathy, and things like that. Here's the 10 healthy men. 10 healthy men, sleep deprived, 1 week as well, 8 hours to 5 hours, 10 to 15% decrease in testosterone levels. Just like that. Pretty profound. So when you layer this in with our concept of, hey, if we want to heal, we want to raise up all the anabolic activities and decrease as much catabolic activity as we can, sleep deprivation is literally doing the exact opposite. Increasing cortisol, which is catabolic, and decreasing our testosterone, which is anabolic. Okay? In women, because women's hormones are much more complicated. This one here was a correlation study. So again, we have to be careful to not say that lack of sleep causes lower levels of FSH, which is then going to mean lower levels of estrogen. We can just say that women who sleep less have lower levels of FSH and therefore lower levels of estrogen, but we don't know which one is which. Okay, we don't know if the low estrogen and low FSH causes the lack of sleep, or if the lack of sleep causes the low FSH and low estrogen. We can assume, but it's still an assumption that, well, in men, if we sleep deprive, we know that testosterone goes down. So likely we would have LH go down. In women, FSH goes down. So maybe that's due to a causative effect. Again, maybe, maybe not. Don't know. The other thing that is really, really fascinating with circadian rhythm biology is that and this, I know a lot of us in here are going to know, but this actually ties in a lot with TCM and the TCM clock on how certain organs have certain times that they function differently or better. And one of the papers I was reading preparing for this actually talked about how in the oncology world, they're starting to look at circadian rhythm biology on when to dose cancer chemotherapy drugs to have the most beneficial effect when the liver is the least active based on its circadian rhythm. Because if that way you can maintain higher levels of cancer drugs to stay in the system longer to have a better effect and not get cleared out. So each organ is going to have its own clock. There's a master clock that resides in the brain that is impacted by different things. A slightly obese man with nice biceps impacts the master clock. Sunshine, temperature, and food. Exercise, sleep, temperature regulation, and food all play into our master clock, which then goes down to the peripheral clocks, okay? We can have dysfunction in the master clock, which then creates dysfunction in peripheral clocks. We can have a normal master clock, and we can see dysfunction in peripheral clocks, okay? Great examples are night shift workers, patients who work out way too late, and then also late eating appears to also shift that circadian rhythm. Why this is important in the stem cell world is one of the ways that our body heals certain areas is obviously the local effect of stem cells, right? The perivascular cells, they come off the capillaries, they do their local healing. But we also have mobilization of hematopoietic stem cells from the bone marrow, which travel through the blood and go to the area of injury and can assist in healing. 5 hours after you go to bed, if you go to bed at normal time, there's a release in hematopoietic stem cells from the bone marrow. So those are now floating through the blood at a slightly higher concentration, okay? If you have a disruption in your circadian rhythm biology, that could be blunted. There's not a lot of great research at this point that's not at the genetic level because one, it's already extremely difficult to measure the low levels of hematopoietic stem cells in the blood to begin with. So there's not a lot of research on, okay, if we sleep deprive a patient, do we see a reduction in that and is it clinically significant or not? But again, it's tying in, okay, what are the harm, what's the harm of sleeping better? Right? What's the potential harm of not sleeping well? Well, potentially you might not be liberating as many hematopoietic stem cells into the blood, which can go and heal not just your injury, but your heart, your brain, different tissues. Because even though it's the hematopoietic stem cell that's going to give the lineage specific to red blood cells, white blood cells, that's still involved in angiogenesis. Hematopoietic stem cells are still involved in healing. Okay?